Have you ever been so sure you were right, so certain of an outcome, that you couldn't even imagine being wrong? Now imagine two men on opposite sides of the world, both gripped by that exact same feeling of absolute certainty. One had built what he believed was a perfect, unbreakable fortress. The other commanded a force so powerful he thought it was simply unstoppable. And over 76 horrific hours, the cold, hard reality of war would prove them both tragically wrong. This is the story of the Battle of Tarawa, and it's more than just history. It's a brutal look at what happens when our best-laid plans smash headfirst into the real world.
So let's start with that first man, with that first absolute certainty. Imagine Japanese Rear Admiral Keiji Shibazaki standing in a command bunker buried deep under layers of coral and coconut logs. He wasn't just looking at a tiny island fortress, he was admiring his masterpiece. To him, Betio Island wasn't just a defensive line, it was a perfectly solved math problem, an equation for guaranteed victory. You know that quote? That wasn't just bravado for his troops, it was a genuine statement of his confidence as an engineer. He truly believed his fortress was, well, mathematically invincible.
So you have to ask, where did this incredible confidence come from? Well, Shibazaki had taken a speck of sand, less than half a square mile, and turned it into what was, pound for pound, probably the most heavily defended piece of real estate on the entire planet.
I mean, just look at these numbers. And it's not just about the number of guns, it's the design, the sheer genius of it. The bunkers weren't just regular concrete. Shibazaki used a special mix with crushed coral, making them incredibly strong. Then he covered them in layers of sand and coconut logs to absorb the shock of any explosion. But the real terror, the true horror of his design, was in the geometry. Every single machine gun, every artillery piece was placed to create this spider's web of interlocking fire. There were absolutely no blind spots, no safe way to approach. The entire island was engineered to funnel any attacking force into a perfectly designed, inescapable crossfire.
But sailing right toward this immovable object was an equally powerful, unstoppable force. We're talking about an American armada, carriers, battleships, transports, the largest amphibious force the world had seen in the Pacific up to that point. And on those ships were 18,000 U.S. Marines. Many of them were battle-hardened veterans from Guadalcanal. And they truly believed, that they'd already seen the worst the war had to throw at them.
And there it is, the other side of the coin of certainty. U.S. Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner, the man in charge of the whole operation, made a promise to his men. He was certain that the raw, overwhelming firepower of his fleet would literally pulverize the island. He thought it would leave nothing and no one alive to fight back. So you see the setup, right? An unbreakable defense versus an unstoppable bombardment. These two absolute, unwavering convictions were on a collision course, and something had to break.
The battle didn't start with the clash of steel on steel. It started with the complete and catastrophic failure of American planning. Two things that the Americans were absolutely certain of, the power of their naval guns and the predictability of the ocean itself, were about to be proven fatally, tragically wrong.
For 3 straight hours, the sky just fell on Betio. Battleships were firing shells the size of a small car. From the decks of the ships, it looked like the island was being wiped off the face of the earth. But then, the shelling stopped. The smoke started to clear, and a terrifying reality set in. The Japanese coastal guns started firing back. Shibasaki's engineering had held. Those layers of sand and logs had done their job. They absorbed the blasts. Out of more than 100 major fortifications, only 4 were destroyed. The fortress was very, very much alive.
And as if that wasn't bad enough, a second disaster was unfolding at the exact same time. The entire invasion plan, the whole thing, depended on a high tide. The planners had guaranteed it would be deep enough for the landing craft to sail right over a shallow coral reef. They'd even been warned by a local officer about this rare, unpredictable phenomenon called a dodging tide. They dismissed him. Tragically, he was right. The tide came in, but it was far too low. Just 3 feet of water.
700 yards. That's the distance between a failed plan and a living nightmare. One by one, the landing craft slammed to a halt on that hidden coral reef. The ramps dropped, and the Marines saw the beach. So close, yet so far away. The only way forward was to get out and wade. 700 yards. That's the length of 7 football fields, and they had to do it carrying 60 pounds of gear through chest-deep water, walking straight into the machine guns of a fortress that was supposed to be nothing but dust and rubble.
And in that moment, Shibazaki's blueprint, his perfect equation, became a horrifying reality. That lagoon wasn't a battlefield, it was a pre-sighted kill zone. The Japanese gunners knew the exact range to every single point. They had it all calculated for their mortars and their artillery. The waiting Marines were being systematically, almost mechanically, cut down by a defensive design that was now working at peak, murderous efficiency.
1,500. That's the number of American casualties, men killed or wounded in just the first 2 hours. Think about that. In the time it takes you to watch a movie, an entire regiment of Marines was practically wiped out. The invasion was on the verge of total collapse before most of the men had even felt sand under their boots.
Now this right here shows the cruel genius of the Japanese defense. For the few hundred men who actually made it to the beach, the only possible cover was a low seawall made of coconut logs. It was the only thing to hide behind. But Shibazaki had planned for that. He placed his machine guns not to fire out towards the ocean, but to fire parallel to the beach, to fire right down the line of that seawall. This meant the very act of taking cover from the guns in front of you exposed your entire body to a hail of bullets from the side. It was a perfect trap.
This timeline really shows you the desperation of the situation. You go from near total disaster at hour 2 to somehow clawing their way to victory 74 hours later. So, what changed? What could possibly turn that around? When the grand strategy completely fell apart in a storm of chaos and blood, something else, something totally different had to take its place.
Shibazaki's perfect plan, his mathematical certainty, it accounted for steel, for concrete, for interlocking fields of fire. But there was one variable he couldn't put into his equation. The one thing that defies all calculation. The raw, some would say irrational, determination of the individual Marine to keep attacking when every single odd was stacked against him.
This was the order that changed everything. It came from Colonel David Shoup, the commander on the beach. He was wounded. His command post was just a bloody patch of sand under that seawall, and he made the call that defined the rest of the battle. There would be no retreat, there would be no evacuation. The only way off that beach was forward, through the enemy. His order was a brutal acknowledgement of the terrible price, but it insisted that the only path to survival was through more attack.
So in the end, victory wasn't won by a brilliant plan. It was bought, inch by bloody inch, by individuals like these. Men like Lieutenant Hawkins, crawling on his belly from one machine gun nest to the next, taking out 6 of them before he finally fell. Or Staff Sergeant Bordalong, using demolition charges to single-handedly destroy 2 strong points before being killed while attacking a third. And Lieutenant Bonneman, who led what everyone knew was a suicidal charge right up the side of Shibazaki's main command bunker, drawing all the fire so his men could get close enough to destroy it. They weren't following a grand strategy anymore. They were just punching holes in Shibazaki's perfect geometry through sheer, unbelievable force of will.
Tarawa was a tactical catastrophe, a nightmare. But it became one of the most important strategic classrooms of the entire war. The official report on the battle was literally subtitled "Lessons Written in Blood." And the American military, to their credit, studied every single mistake, every failure, with a brutal honesty to make sure it would never, ever be repeated.
And look at what came out of that disaster. The failures at Tarawa led directly to a revolution in warfare. That tide problem, it led to the creation of the underwater demolition teams, the UDTs, who were the direct ancestors of today's Navy SEALs. Their job was to scout the beaches beforehand. The failed bombardment, that led to multi-day shellings with brand new bunker-busting, armor-piercing rounds. And that reef problem, the one that caused so much death, it led to a massive increase in the production of amphibious tractors, or LVTs, the only vehicles that actually made it ashore at Tarawa.
In this chart, this shows you the payoff, the proof that the sacrifice mattered. Just 3 months later, at the Battle of Kwajalein, an even more heavily fortified island, they applied every single lesson. Instead of 3 hours of bombardment, they got 3 days. Instead of a handful of amphibious tractors, they had over 700. They sent in the UDTs to scout the reef first. And the result? Just look at that casualty rate. They took the island with roughly 1/5 the rate of casualties as Tarawa. The lessons learned in blood had an immediate and massive life-saving effect.
And that right there is the terrible but vital legacy of Tarawa. The 3,000 American casualties were an absolutely appalling price to pay for that tiny strip of sand. But the knowledge purchased with their lives fundamentally changed how America fought the rest of the war. It saved tens of thousands of their brothers in arms on future beaches, infamous places like Iwo Jima and Okinawa. The price of being so certain had been catastrophic, but the lessons it taught were, in the end, priceless.
So it really leaves us with this question.
doesn't it? A question that echoes far beyond any battlefield and right into our own lives. When our own best-laid plans, our own absolute certainties, shatter against an unexpected reality, what's left? What do we have to carry us forward? Those 76 hours at Tarawa suggest a brutal, but maybe an inspiring answer. In the end, it's not the perfection of the plan that guarantees success. It's the simple, unbreakable will to see it through, no matter the cost.